Good evening, everyone, or good morning, wherever you are.
Good morning.
If Marcia joins us, it's 8 o'clock in Los Angeles. So that's I don't know if anyone is up that early in the States. Hi, Jill. Okay, so we're going to start. Let me first of all share the screen. Okay, and so as I told you, this is related to a Midrash that I wrote many years ago, making a very strange claim. And the claim, which I hope will convince you by the end, is that the haftarah for this week is related to Miriam. But first of all, let's just a few little reminders about Miriam. So we usually think about Miriam singing at the Song of the Sea. We think of her dancing. We think of her with Miriam's cup. We think of her standing from afar, watching over the little baby, who, by the way, does not look like a newborn, but okay. And then she's also associated with the water. And this is a picture from the Dura Europa synagogue. And I don't know how many of you know about the Dura Europa synagogue. So anyway, I just thought it might be worthwhile. Let me just stop the sharing for a minute to go into wait, I had it open. Why don't I have it open now? 1 minute. I have to open it up again. Okay, sorry about that. 1 minute. So I just had it open, so bear with me. Here we go. Sharing again. Okay, so first of all, the Dura Europa synagogue is located in Syria, actually. And it was discovered in 1932. What they found was a synagogue which is in pretty good shape. I once attended a lecture about it. I've actually forgotten most of what I heard, but there was a reason for why it was still in good shape, because it was near the city walls and the walls protected it. And there were amazing pictures there. And let's look at some of the pictures just to give you a sense of why this is such an important, and most of the pictures I think were removed, they're no longer there. But so this is to give you a sense of what it looked like. So here you could see here, this is the central image here, right? So what would be here would be the most important ones. Here's the center again, all right? Just to give you a sense of what it looks like. And then there are the individual pictures, which are really, really, really unbelievable. Here's an interior picture of the synagogue here, all right? And lots of pictures. It's no longer available for us to look at it. So remember, this is Syria. But everything was apparently either stolen or preserved so just to give you a sense of some of the beautiful, beautiful pictures that you have. And each one depicts something else, all right? It depicts a story. So here is stories connected to Aaron. There's stories, here's one with Miriam, not with Miriam, with the baby, right? With the baby being taken out, and then with the attendants. And so the picture that we're looking at right now, so let me just go out now, stop share. So again, I don't know what you know about the Duros, but the pictures are really amazing. And so a lot of people use those pictures, and you hear Duros Europas, but you don't really know what it is. So just to show you what it is, because I never knew what it was. I would hear people say Duros Europas, and I had no idea what they were talking about. So I'm just sharing with you, since I didn't know what people were talking about in the past, I'm sharing with you just a little bit. But that's just, in Hebrew, Kitseha Masleg, how would you translate that? The
tip of the iceberg.
Tip of the iceberg.
The iceberg, thank you. Masleg is actually a fork, right? So, but we don't have icebergs in Israel, so. Okay, so let me go back to sharing. Okay, so this is the picture that we have here from Duros Europa synagogue, and here is the the well, and so the well of Miriam is associated with her, and it's supposedly near Tiberias, so she's associated with water. And if you remember, when she dies, that's when they have the whole incident with the water, right? I mean, right after she dies, there's no water, and there's also a little. Okay, anyway, we're not going to spend that much time talking about Miriam, although she is the topic when we come to it later. Okay, so here, just a few words about the haftarah. This coming week is the 5th haftarah of consolation, right? If you remember, where before Tisha B'Av you have the bad haftarot, and then now we have the ones of consolation. So although some of them are pretty bad themselves, but okay. So whereas before God hid his face and God was angry, now there's a little bit of love and a little bit of kindness and a sense that don't worry, you won't feel any grace anymore, be comforted, you have all of this sort of thing. And so the sense that you can't build a future if there is a foundation of shame. So this was, if you could also Google it, and you could read what she wrote on the website. What's Jan Orbach wrote. Okay. So Phyllis Tribble, who's a wonderful, wonderful Bible scholar, I think she died a couple of years ago, but she basically wrote that buried within Scripture are bits and pieces of a story awaiting discovery. It highlights the woman Miriam. To unearth the fragments, assemble them, ponder the gaps, and then construct a text requires the play of many methods, but the dogmatism of none. Basically, what she's saying is we should keep an open mind, right? We should have our minds open, and this can lead us to understanding Midrash, making connections, writing our own Midrash. So keep this in mind, because I'm using this almost as justification for what I did. Here's another, if we talk about Midrash, here's really very much a Midrash on Miriam's song. And you have here the people escaping from escaping, and then you have the people drowning, and you have all, this almost looks like an orgy going on here, actually, but okay. I'm not quite sure if I understand what that has to do with anything, but it's an interesting picture. And here is a picture of Miriam's well, right? All the people are going, you can see them going to her well. Here's the water coming out, and people are going with their buckets or whatever you want, the pitchers, to go get the very, very pastoral thing. This is actually in a Passover Haggadah. Miriam's well illuminated manuscript, Karen Johnson, Passover Haggadah. I have no idea where I saw this, but if any of you have that Haggadah, I imagine it's an amazing Haggadah. Okay, so how did all of this begin? So first of all, keep in mind that we, in our synagogue, as in many synagogues, we don't read the entire Torah reading. So it's like every 3 years, we come back to the same passages, all right? So I actually loved this particular haftarah, which is Roni Akara, Shout, O Barren One. And so, I really always thought of the barren one as being associated with the haftarah. I'll explain to you in a minute why. But why did I wait so long? Because we only read this particular passage every 3 years, which is, remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the journey after you left Egypt, okay? What did God do to her?
Gave her leprosy.
Gave her leprosy, right? With Numbers 12, okay? In Numbers 12, when she and Aaron talked about Moses, all right? And then you also have this verse in this week's parasha. When brothers dwell together and one of them dies and leaves no son, the wife of the deceased shall not be married to a stranger. His brother's widow shall go up to him, spit in his face if he does not agree to marry her, right? That's called chalitza, right? That should be done to the man who will not build up his brother's house. So you have here something that God did to Miriam, and also something spitting in the face, right? And I said to myself, wait a minute, it's true, let's go back to what Ron Auerbach is saying, that this is the haftarah of consolation, which means it has nothing, and I say that in quotation marks, it has nothing to do with the parasha, right? It's only about consolation. On the other hand, it is the parasha, it is the haftarah that's read always in association with this, all right? So this was one of these were two texts that I noticed, all right? Then, over the years, and it took me quite a few years, over the years, I became convinced that the rabbis chose this particular haftarah because of the connection with Miriam. And so I set out to prove it, all right? And I said that the text of Deuteronomy 24:9 and 25:5 is very negative. They both refer to Numbers 12, right? In other words, that the implication is that God punished Miriam with scales for speaking out against the Cushite woman, all right? And speaking out is a sin. And then also that God says to Moses, if her father spat in her face, would she not bear her shame? And so, spitting in the face and spitting in the face. You have two spitting in the face here, right? So that is also interesting thing, okay? And then there's a very well-known Midrash. So here I'm also working not only with text, but also with Midrash, which very well-known, and its genealogy is based on the Book of Chronicles. And so by looking at this Midrash and the genealogy, I came to the conclusion that all of these intertexts, which I'll show you in a minute, interact and serve as an internal commentary on each other, all right? So my 6 intertexts, right, already we've seen 2 of them, or maybe even 3, are internal commentary, and most of them are biblical verses, and some of them are midrashic commentary, right? So the first one is and we've come across this midrash before. The first intertext is the king of Egypt who spoke to the Hebrew midwives, right? And who were these midwives, all right? So there are those who say they were Yocheved and Miriam, and there are those who say it was Yocheved and Elisheva, right? And they say that Shifra is Yocheved. Why will she called Shifra? Because she beautifies Shifra, Mishaperet, right, the newborn babe, right? Or she was fruitful, like Peru, all right? And Miriam is Pua. Why? Because she cried out Poah to the child as she brought it forth. In other words, as she was pulling out, she was saying Poah, Poah, as she brought it forth. Right? And also that she had divine inspiration. So she's connected with birth, and she's connected with birth, Miriam, that is, and birth and fruitfulness. Okay, all right. And then this whole idea of houses, all right, a continuation of the Midrash, that you have houses, and because the midwives feared God, he made them houses. And then it says in this Midrash, right, that there are the houses. What are they? There's the priestly house and the Levitical house. The priest and Levitical, that's Aaron, and Moses is the Levi, all right? And they're also royal houses. Who's royal? David. And then you have this very strange thing in the Midrash, is that David descended from Miriam, as it is written. And here you now have all these strange names. Azubah died, and Caleb took Ephrat, who bore him Hur, right? And David was the son of that Ephratite, okay? And then you have these words, Azubah, Yeriot, all right? And you have Azubah identified with Miriam. All of these things are very complicated. I'm not trying to, explain anything here because they're very complicated. I'm not even sure if I understand it. But this is a midrash saying that Miriam is married. There's no evidence of her being married in the Bible, right? And B, she's the great grandmother or whatever of David, right? From that family. And then you also have another name for Miriam, which is Yiriot, because her face was like curtains. So you have these names, Yiriot, and you also have Azuvah, right? And these names are names which will be right? And Azuvah is identified with Miriam, and so is Yiriot. Okay, and now we have other names. Midrash goes on and on and on. Other names, Hila, Naara. All right. So Miriam is like these two women, Hila and Naara. Okay. So she now has all these names associated with her. Now, what does that have to do with? We'll come to the haftarah in a minute. Just to remind you that the other proof test is the one that we know, which is the spitting in the face. All right. That God was incensed with Miriam, right? The cloud withdrew from the tent, and there was Miriam stricken with snow white sails. In other words, so God was incensed with Miriam. He withdrew his presence from her. She's cursed and shut out of the camp. So in other words, if you think of Miriam, she's no longer welcome in the camp. She's an outsider. She's been rejected. All right. When she's allowed back in the camp, God returns to her and she to him, and she's once more in favor. So we have here an angry God, right? We also have rabbis who don't really like Miriam. They don't like this Miriam, right? They like the other Miriam, but not the one here because she's going against Moses. So what you have is a situation where, according to the biblical stories, Miriam is unmarried and she's childless. Okay, let's start with that. And if she's unmarried and childless, it's a major problem for Miriam. There's no closure for her. All right. So God here is angry at her, but then he lets her be readmitted. And not only that, the people wait for her. Right? They don't go marching on. So God, this is the premise. God is angry at Miriam, but he takes her back. Okay. So the question is, how do the rabbis arrive at the peculiar genealogy of a midrash above? Okay, this I'm really not going to go into because just look at the names and you'll realize why I don't want to go into it. But you have all these names here, this is where the midrash that we just saw got all of those names from 1 Chronicles, right? And so you have here names like Perez, Chetzron, Kalev, Azuvah, Hur, Uri, right? Bezalel, Tekoa, right? Hela, Naara, all of these names. And then there's someone whose name is also Miriam. Is it our Miriam? Who knows, all right? It's somebody whose name is Miriam. But all of these things are the background for that particular midrash, all right? So in 1 Chronicles, we have someone called Azuvah, who may be conflated with Uriot, all right? Then Caleb marries several women and has children by them, all right? And so the question is, what does the name Azuvah mean? What does the name Azuvah actually mean?
Abandoned.
Abandoned, right? Left, right? Azuvah is someone who's abandoned. She's abandoned by God, the people, Moses, all right? So you have here the whole idea that that Caleb got Azuvah, and these were her sons. Azuvah is Miriam, right? And why was she called Azuvah? Because they all forsook her. Okay, keep in mind, this is very important. So she was both forsaken and then cured by God, who took her back. Okay, and according to the Midrash, she did have children, and David came from Miriam. And the fourth thing is the proof text we saw before. Remember what God did to Miriam, okay? And there's a Midrash which says that when God waged war at the Red Sea, Miriam chanted a song, and she was named prophetess. However, when she slandered her brother, God commanded that she should be sent to the mines, as it is said, and Miriam was shut up. So in other words, the rabbis love Miriam when she's on Moses' side, and when she's not, they really don't like her. Okay? And then we also saw the spitting in the face before. So I actually as I mentioned before, I conflated the spitting of the wife to the deceased with God who spits in Miriam's face. Okay. Now, these connections that I'm making, what I want to point out to you, which seem totally weird, but these are not the connections that I'm making yet. I haven't made them yet. These are connections the rabbis are making, which are really off the wall, right? They're off the wall. Why? Because these names and everything, how did they get to this Midrash, which, as I said before, which is so well known, right? This Midrash here, right? The one from B. Sota, from the Talmud. It's so well known. And where did they get it from? They got it from Chronicles. So they took all these names and they created this crazy Midrash based totally on, on their, okay. And now we come to the haftarah. And the haftarah is our 6 text, okay? So you have here, this is the basic idea of it's not the whole thing, but rejoice, O barren one, you who bore no child, shout aloud for joy, for you did not travail. For the children of the wife forlorn shall outnumber those of the espoused, said the Lord. Why should a barren person rejoice? She shouldn't, right? No one is answering, right? So why? Because the children of the wife forlorn, of the barren one, who bore no child, shall outnumber those of the espoused. So in the future, the barren one is going to have lots and lots of children. Now, we'll come back to this again. Why is this so important, right? And then we have all of these words here about enlarging the size of your tent. And here the word is yiriot, right? The word is yiriot. And you have all the words that we looked at before who are here. Don't be ashamed, fear not, don't be ashamed, do not cringe, you shall not be disgraced, right? Again, I read this as God talking to Miriam. She's going to have children in the future. You may have been shamed in the past, but don't cringe. You will not be disgraced, all right? And you will forget the reproach of your youth. You will remember no more the shame of your widowhood. For he who made you will espouse you. His name is God, okay? The Lord has called you back as a wife forlorn and forsaken. Can I cast off my wife, of my youth, God says, okay? And then for a little while I forsook you. All right, that's when she had the leprosy, right? But with vast love I will bring you back. In slight anger I hid my face from you, but with kindness everlasting I will take you back in love. But this is like the waters of Noah, the association with waters of Noah. There will be no floods anymore. I won't be angry with you anymore. The mountains may move, the hills be shaken, but my loyalty should never move from you, nor my covenant of friendship be shaken. Okay, so you could understand, I hope, why I sort of made a connection and said that this was connected to Miriam, right? Let me stop for a minute now and see if any of that makes sense to you. By the way, when I taught this to a bunch of rabbis many, many years ago, by the time I stopped at this point, they were all convinced. It was really funny. Anyone want to comment so far? Anyway, just to show you the strange way that Midrash comes into being. Okay, now we continue. Okay, so, whoops. So basically, this is what I as I went along, I made the connections. Okay, I don't think I have to read all of this. So, however, because I was convinced about this, I looked and looked and looked and looked and see if I could find. I said, it's so obvious to me. The rabbis must have been thinking the same thing. right? It was, to me, it was so, and I did a lot of research over the years, right? So you have here the idea of procreation and the Davidic dynasty assuring Miriam, or Miriam can be a stand-in for Israel, by the way, happiness and continuity, right? And I also like the idea that the people thought of her as a leader and they waited for her while she was in the, okay. So as I just said before, I looked and looked and looked, and I could not find any rabbinical text which made the connection, right? I still today believe there's some rabbi out there who's made the connection, but I haven't been able to find it. And finally, I said, after searching and searching, I said, you know what? I've been writing Midrash. I'm going to write my own Midrash, right? And I'm going to write it in the style of rabbis who have their way of writing it. And I wrote it originally in Hebrew, in the traditional rabbinic form. And then later I translated it into English in order to read a wider audience, right? So my purpose was to create the missing Midrash, right? The one that I'm convinced exists. I haven't been able to find it. So instead I wrote it, okay? So my Midrash, based on all those texts that you saw and the Midrash, doesn't retract from the theme of reconciliation, all right? Or from the allegory of marriage between God and the people. If anything, it strengthens these themes by adding an additional dimension, all right? And so I start with a verse. I start with a verse from Deuteronomy, followed by another opening from Isaiah, and then I ask a question, right? And this is the way traditional Midrash works. And then I treat the prophetic verses in the same order that they appear in the Bible. And then at the end, there's an ending which completes the Midrash, going back to the opening quotation from Deuteronomy, all right? And unlike classical Midrash, I openly refer to and build on the previous Midrash. Usually, Midrashim don't build on Midrash, although that is really, and as I pointed out, I have not invented this strange genealogy, okay? So, first of all, I refer to myself by my Hebrew name, Naomi Tova Bat Sarah Yecheskel, all right? And as I said, I wrote it in Hebrew. So I put my name in there. By the way, when this was written in Hebrew, remember, originally. So when people saw it, they freaked out. They said, who is this Naomi Tova Bat Sarah Yecheskel? They didn't realize it was me, okay? So it starts out with that phrase, remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the journey after you left Egypt. And then the phrase from the shout, O barren one, you who bore no child, shout aloud for joy, you who did not travail, okay? The barren one is Miriam. And why was Miriam referred to as barren? Didn't we study in the Midrash that the house of the kingdom is descended from Miriam because David was descended from Miriam? Furthermore, does it not say, enlarge the site of your tent, extend the size of your dwelling? Site, Yeriot, is Miriam, for according to the Midrash, her face resembled Yeriot. Okay, and now I take verses from the actual text of the haftarah. Shout aloud for joy. And Miriam was jubilant and happy, for her agony and desolation was changed to happiness and song. May the barren one greatly rejoice. And here, this is from the wedding. I take phrases from all over, which, by the way, Midrash does. May the barren one greatly rejoice and exult when her children will be gathered in her midst in joy. You shall, in the marriage ceremony, create joy for the beloved companions, as you used to gladden the heart of your creatures in the Garden of Eden. This is all in a marriage. Those of you who go to weddings, that's usually said in Hebrew, but these are the translation of the words in Hebrew. Was created joy and gladness, bridegroom and bride, rejoicing, song, mirth, delight, love, and brotherhood, peace, and friendship. Okay, that's Titzarina, da 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 da. Right? You've heard that. Okay. All right. And her creator, Baal, swore to comfort Rachem her because he opened up Patoach Patach. He opened up, right, Miriam's womb. Therefore, it is said, "You shall not be called the forsaken, Azuvah, for it is God who wants you and espouses Baal." All right, this is all from the haftarah. Goes on again. You to not travail. Why is Miriam referred to as the not travail? Okay, and it goes on because Miriam was stricken with snow white scales. Aaron said, "Don't be like a dead person." And Moses said, "Oh God, please heal her." This teaches us that Miriam took sick travail, and they treated her like they customarily do with the dead, and even God deserted her. Miriam thought to herself, "Don't call me Miriam, call me Maryam, bitter waters, for the nation has spat in my face. As it is written, she spat in his face." But the Lord said to Moses, "If her father spat twice, Yarak, in her face, would she not bear her shame, be locked up?" Now here, the word klima, right, could also come from kele, to lock her up, or like klaim, or klima, which is shame. Okay, it has both meanings. For 7 days. But the Blessed Holy One had mercy on Miriam. Okay. So this goes on. And then finally, not finally, but you shall forget the reproach of your youth. And now we have the story of Caleb. What is he? Caleb took her. What does that mean? After she was cured, he did an act of taking her to be his wife because he was so overjoyed with her. Instead of being neglected and hated, I made her an object of joy for generations. As we studied in the Midrash, the houses of kings from Miriam, for David descended from Miriam. Okay, and then it goes on, it goes on and on and on. I don't even know if we have time. Well, we do have time, actually. All right. As a wife forlorn and forsaken that is Miriam. For a little while I forsook you, as the cloud withdrew from the tent. And why is Miriam described as abandoned? For it's not written that Miriam was shut out of camp. The people did not march on until Miriam was readmitted. Right? And now I'm playing around with the name Miriam, which before was called bitter, right? And now I'm changing it. Don't call me Miriam, call me Miriam. I will raise you up. How did the Holy One lift Miriam up? Didn't our mother, the barren Hannah, say in her prayer, "The Lord humiliates and raises high, Meromaim. He raises the poor from the dust, lifts up Yarim, the needy, from the garbage heap, and he grants their descendants a seat of honor. For from the depths I called you, and God listened to my voice." Okay, and with an upraised hand, by Ramah, again, we have the same root, Miriam, Ramah. God took Miriam out of the depths of her misery, for she had found favor with him in the wilderness, and he went to soothe her, okay? And he said, "I will build you up again, O maiden Israel. You shall take up your timbrels," and we associate the timbrels, of course, with Miriam, also Israel, but also with Miriam, "and go forth, and you shall be praised with timbrel and dancing." Then the wife of his youth, that's Miriam. Why is she referred to as Na'ara? Because she was sick and her illness was shaken off. Nin'ara. And God restored her to her youth. Na'aruta. Okay, playing with the idea of, and then after she recovered, she had sons. Again, in my great anger, I hid my face from you. So again, the whole idea of the cloud withdrawing from the tent and then returning from the tent, and God remembering Miriam. And here the word is pakad, all right? Now, pakad and zachor go together, right? If you remember God, when he remembers
Sarah.
Sarah, thank you. When he remembers Sarah, he said, Adonai pakad et Sarah, right? When he remembers Hannah, he says zachar. It's not the same word. So, but both of them are associated with remembering and then getting somebody then gets pregnant, all right? So Pekidah is synonymous with Zechirah, as it is written. I remember Zacharti, favorably the days when you were young and devoted to me. Zacharti lachesed urayach, right? We know that, we sing that on Rosh Hashanah. Okay, now again we have the waters of Noah, refers to the whale and all the things that were created in the 10 things that were created on Shabbat during twilight, and one of them was the rainbow, and the other one was Miriam as well. All right, so this shows that God has chesed. And finally, and now we are at the last thing, I asked the question, how did God remember Miriam? Remember, just to go back to the very beginning, in case you forgot, the opening phrase was, remember what the Lord did to Miriam on the journey after you left Egypt, all right? So in a Midrash, you have to explain and you have to understand, why do you have that particular opening phrase, right? So how did God remember Miriam? Wasn't Miriam barren? And there are no texts associated with Miriam which say, and God remembered Miriam and opened up her room, as is written about our mother Rachel. However, it is written, he restores the childless woman among her household as a happy mother of children. There were 7 barren women who were restored: Sarai, Rebecca, Leah, Rachel, Manoach's wife, Hannah, and Zion. Restoring the childish woman, that is Zion, for it is said, rejoice, O barren woman. And why does Miriam fit into this picture? To restore the childless woman is like restoring barren Zion to a rightful place, giving her a house of Torah. And then Zion rejoiced in her children, and her children shared in her happiness, as is written, O children of Zion, be glad, rejoice in the Lord your God, and you shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, and my people shall be shamed no more. This is from Joel. And thus Miriam was granted the crown of wisdom and royalty, in that she gave birth to Bezalel, who was the ancestor of David, according to the Midrash. And now, and this is the most important thing for a person writing Midrash, just read something. Therefore, remember what the Lord your God did to Miriam on the journey after you left Egypt. Don't read zachor, remember in the future, but instead read zachar, remembered in the past. God remembered Miriam in the past, right? So here, it's not to read it as God. We're supposed to remind ourselves about the leprosy, but we're supposed to remind ourselves about how God took her back in the past, okay? So this is really, this is the Midrash that I wrote. Now, I hope you're still a wide awake after all of that. It's not easy reading, but this was the Midrash that I wrote in Hebrew. Obviously, it reads better in Hebrew because you have all the allusions and you have the words from the haftarah in Hebrew and whatever, but I think you get the idea, right? It's not the usual type of Midrash that I write, right? And still write even, but it's written in this very archaic manner. And it turns out that a lot of people, I did not know, to tell you the truth, that other people were writing these types of midrashim. And I found out later that there are a whole bunch of women who are writing these types of midrashim. And a lot of them appear in the collection of Dir Shuni, which I think I brought into you. And I actually had sent this into Dir Shuni. They didn't want it. It didn't fit into their, they wanted me to make too many changes. It didn't fit into their rubric, into the way they had things. However, I wrote an academic paper, which I gave also. And that's, by the way, when I gave that academic paper, all of these women who had contributed to Dershuni were all sitting there. I didn't know that. And here I'm giving this paper at the World Conference of Judaism, whatever it's called. It meets every 4 years, and it's a big deal. And here I'm giving my paper with slides, and then at the end, all of them start jumping at me and saying, "There are other people writing Midrashim. You're not the only one," And they all, and I felt like real total ignoramus. But okay, that can happen to anyone. But they were all there, and it was really very funny. But I did write this academic article. You could also read it. It's available for you to read. But one of the things I explained the Midrash. But one of the things which I thought was interesting was my conclusion. Wait, am I sharing this with you? No, I'm not.
No.
So this is the conclusions of my article, which had to do with why am I making, as a feminist, right? As a feminist who wrote a Midrash, why am I making such a big deal of Miriam having children? Yeah, what's wrong with me, right? I mean, something's the matter with me, right? So I had to write some sort of an excuse. So this is what I wrote, which is a little bit apologetic, right? As feminist Jews in the 21st century, we must find a way to use Miriam as a model for both leadership and continuity. It has been a truism to point to the diminishing birth rate of highly educated Jewish women. Seeing the importance of children and grandchildren to my own continuity, I think I can safely argue that one can be pro-natal while not necessarily accepting that women be confined to their essentialist role. Okay, is that clear? In other words, you can still have children, but that doesn't have to define you. Right? In my Midrash, God is returning to his people via Miriam. Miriam does not demand that God account for his actions toward her. God is doing tshuva, return, or repentance on his own by giving her a husband and by taking responsibility for her previous state of barrenness. He comes forward toward her of his own free will and grants her a son who will be the messianic figure of the future. In this way, Miriam is restored to her people and granted immortality. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, I wrote this many, many years ago, and I was working on it for years and years and years. And I ran the Hebrew by a lot of great scholars, actually, including Avidor Shinan, who's a very well-known scholar of Midrash, and I really ran it by all sorts of people before daring to print it. I'm not so sure if I would write it today, to be perfectly honest, right? Because today there's so much more choice, and you don't have to necessarily have your own baby; you could adopt, right? In other words, and there's so many people who are stopping having children because they are looking ahead to the future, actually, and they're saying, what kind of world are we in? So I think that there's, there are lots of pros and cons. So I don't know if I would make such a big deal. And also I feel that what I wrote here is a little bit apologetic and I don't like to be apologetic. But now I come to tell you something very interesting. So I've convinced all of you, right, that this is Miriam? Okay, so let's go back for a minute to Genesis chapter 11, where we have lots and lots of begats. Begat, right? And then now Sarai was barren. She had no child, okay? Let's look at the Hebrew. Vatahi Sarai Akara Ein La Valad. And in our haftarah, we have, O barren one, who bore no child. Look at the Hebrew. Akara, Ein, none, lo, Valad, God Yalada, okay? And then we also have the phrase, which I pointed out to you before, that God took note or singled out of Sarah, Vadonai Pakad, right? And that the Lord did for Sarah as he had spoken. Okay. Now, I sat in on a class of a wonderful, wonderful scholar. Her name is Michal Bar Asher Siegel, and she's married to a philologist whose name is Elitzur Bar Asher Siegel, so they have the same names. She's an amazing scholar, and actually she's now some vice president. She's also an up-and-coming person. She's, I think, one of the vice presidents for international affairs at Ben Gurion University. And I sat in her class, and she wrote about this particular poem. And I read it. I downloaded the article, and she talked about why should the barren woman rejoice? Is there something about her current situation that calls for joy despite her barrenness? Or is her happiness related to a future development involving children? Will the children of the desolate woman be born in the future, or do they already exist at the time of the call to rejoice? And if the latter, how can a barren children have children? She basically asks a lot of very, very good questions. And then, okay. Now, what I want to explain to how all of this happened. All of this is based on her article, which is a little complicated. I'm not going to go into it. However, what will I share with you? All right, some of you may have remembered me telling you this last year when I told this. I was in Chicago as a scholar in residence. They have I don't know if they still do, but they had United Synagogue used to have scholar in residence for the month before Thanksgiving, between the high holidays after Sukkot, for a whole month, 4 to 6 weeks or something like that. And they put me up. It was really lovely. And every week I would speak at a different synagogue. And in the middle of the week I would teach. And it was really, fantastic. And and I loved it. It was really just wonderful. They gave me a car. They gave me a place to stay. And it was just, it was a dream, except for Chicago being cold and freezing. But otherwise it was lovely. I drove around Chicago. Unfortunately, in those days, they didn't have Waze, so I got lost a few times. But otherwise, my recollections are really wonderful. So the first Shabbat that I went was the Shabbat when you read what I just showed you before, Shabbat before Shabbat of Noah. And there was a bat mitzvah, and there was a young woman who was reading the haftarah, which I love and really love, and she was totally butchering it. It was awful, really awful. And I'm sitting there listening to her butchering the Hebrew, and to take my mind off of it, because I just couldn't stand it. I went and I looked back at the parsha, and I saw what I just showed you now, all the begats. And all of a sudden I had this, like, in Hebrew, nafali ha'asimon. It was a click moment. It was a click moment, and I said, oh my gosh, that haftarah that I wrote, which was all about Miriam, is really about Sarah. And you have no idea how painful this was to me, right? To think about it, right? That I had spent 10 years of my life proving and writing a Midrash to show that it was Miriam. And now all of a sudden I said, and this, by the way, this was before I had read what Michal Bar Asher had to say, right? This was way before. Okay, what do? I'm supposed to, after the haftarah, I'm a scholar in residence, I'm supposed to go up and speak. So I go up and I say, oh, I was listening to a wonderful rendition of the haftarah, And all of a sudden I realized, and I told him the truth. I dropped my my notes. I don't even know what I was supposed to talk about. And I just spoke off the cuff, telling them, this story, and telling them that all these years I've been writing a Midrash to show that it was women. All of a sudden I realized that the beautiful haftarah that you just read is really a commentary on the end of Noah, because you read the same exact haftarah twice a year. Once for Kiteitzei, I forgot to tell you that. Once for Kiteitzei and once for Noah. Okay? So that's my sad story.
It's not sad. I think it shows the beauty. I mean, that literature, if you want to call the Tanakh literature, it is open to so many different interpretations. So it really could apply to Miriam and to Sarah and to all the barren women.
Absolutely, absolutely. And not only that, but I also found another, I forgot the guy's name. I found another poem showing the connection between Roni Akara and Sarah. I found another one. So in other words, I was outside the ball field, right? In terms of, but I still stand by what I wrote. I mean, I don't change it, but it's a cute story because I still think, because of my 6 intertexts, right? The 6 intertexts that I have, that it does justify relating it to the one of the spitting in the face, and and the fact is that you do have zachor asher asa Miriam. You have that in this week's parasha that we're reading next week. So if any of you were in the synagogue this week, take a look at the parasha from beginning to end. And I did not write about it this week. I actually have, each year I plan to write about that in my blog, and I never do because something else comes up. So this week I had something completely different that I wrote about, and had nothing to do with this. And maybe next year I'll write about it, or maybe not. I don't know what I'll be doing next year. So anyway, any comments or whatever, we will not be meeting next week. I'll be in, even though theoretically I could teach because I'll be in New York, but I don't want to.
No, enjoy your time there.
Yeah,
I have no idea what's happening. Probably 11 o'clock in the morning, I'll be okay in New York time, but I don't want to. I know I enjoy teaching this, but I don't want to. So first of all, let me stop the Zoom, and then we can also continue. Stop the recording, and then we could.